The desert sky above the outpost was a bruised shade of violet, its vast emptiness broken only by the quiet hum of the perimeter towers. Elias Ward rubbed grease from his hands onto the thigh of his coveralls, blinking away the sting of fatigue. Out here, on the edge of mapped space, there was little more than dust, silence, and the low thrum of machines that always seemed on the verge of failing. He had grown accustomed to loneliness. The outpost was not meant for company, just for monitoring, repairing, and reporting. Days bled together in the static of routine, until the beacon came. It was faint at first, a thin thread of static woven through his console. Elias frowned, adjusted the filters, and froze as a pattern emerged, an automated distress signal, old and nearly broken. Coordinates pulsed in its rhythm, pointing to somewhere just beyond the horizon. He sat back, uncertain. Protocol told him to log it and wait for command, but command was half a sector away, and whoever had sent that signal did not have the luxury of waiting. He pulled on his jacket, slung his tool pack over his shoulder, and guided the rover into the violet dusk. The crash site was marked by a shallow furrow in the sand, a trail of scorched earth leading to a small, half-buried pod. Its hull was unfamiliar, patterned with curves and angles that didn't belong to any human craft. Elias slowed, heart hammering, and approached cautiously. The pod's hatch was warped open, smoke hissing from its edges. Inside, curled against the wall, was a figure. At first glance, she looked fragile, her limbs folded protectively, her skin faintly luminescent in the twilight. A pale shimmer traced her cheekbones, fading into hair the color of midnight oil. She opened her eyes as he leaned closer, and Elias felt the air catch in his throat, irises too wide, catching the light like liquid silver. She whispered something, a string of soft, fluid syllables that slid past his comprehension. Elias crouched, palms raised in a gesture of peace. "Hey, you're alive. That's good. I'm here to help." She answered with another phrase, slower this time, but no clearer. Between them, the barrier of language rose like a wall. Elias searched his memory for universal signals, gestures, body language. He tapped his chest. "Elias." Then pointed at her, inviting her to respond. She blinked, hesitated, then reached shakily to a device strapped around her throat. It sparked faintly, its surface fractured, half melted. She tapped it with trembling fingers, then looked at him with an expression that needed no translation. "Help me." The device must have been some kind of translator, Elias thought, but broken beyond function. He extended his hand toward it. She flinched, instinctively protective, then after a long breath, let him draw closer. The machine was delicate, a marvel of engineering even in its ruined state. But within the cracks, etched faintly along its circuits, were markings unlike anything he had seen in manuals or alien databases, strange runes, geometric yet alive, as though they hummed with some silent resonance. He pulled a small diagnostic tool from his pack and gently brushed debris away. Sparks leapt, the device flickered, and for an instant, sound poured from it, distorted, like a choir underwater. "No, danger." The voice that emerged was not hers, not entirely. Her eyes widened in horror at the sound, and she snatched at the device, clutching it close to her chest. The expression on her face had shifted from relief to terror, as though something buried deep had been disturbed. Elias sat back, startled. "Okay," he murmured, raising his hands again. "Okay, easy. I'm not here to hurt you." She shook her head vigorously, repeating the word again and again, each attempt garbled by static. "No, no, no," her voice cracked, her silver eyes wet with fear. Elias felt the weight of the moment press on him. He had fixed radios, engines, power cores, even an old AI mainframe once, but never had he seen someone recoil from repair as though it were an act of violence. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her he had only meant to help, but even as the thought formed, the translator in her hands gave another convulsive spark. This time the sound was clear, cold, and wrong. A phrase in a tongue that did not belong to either of them filled the night air. The syllables resonated through the pod's hull, vibrating the ground beneath them. Elias didn't understand the words, but his skin prickled as though the world itself recognized them. The girl pressed her hands over her ears, rocking slightly, and Elias felt her knees crawl up his spine. He had repaired something broken, yes, but perhaps he had awakened something that should have remained silent. The desert wind rose, carrying the echo of that alien phrase across the empty outpost plains. Elias glanced back toward the rover, then at the girl trembling before him. She was no longer just a survivor. She was the beginning of a mystery he had stumbled into, one that reached far beyond the cracked shell of a translator. She looked up at him then, desperation etched into her every movement, and spoke a single word the translator managed to render clearly, a word heavy with meaning. Forbidden. The sound lingered in the night like a curse. Elias's heart pounded, caught between the instinct to run and the pull of curiosity that had always defined him. He had wanted to fix things, to mend what was broken. But sometimes, he realized, repairing one small piece could unravel everything else. And though he didn't yet know the shape of the danger, Elias was certain of one thing: the night had changed, and nothing would be the same when morning came. The word hung between them like a blade. Elias didn't know what it meant in her world, only that the translator's voice had given it a weight that even his bones felt. Forbidden. The girl's trembling fingers clutched the cracked device to her chest as though it were both her lifeline and her doom. Her gaze, wide and liquid silver, locked onto his, searching for something, reassurance, perhaps, or the promise that he hadn't doomed them both by touching what he did not understand. I didn't mean, Elias began, then stopped himself. Words were useless if she couldn't grasp them. Instead, he exhaled slowly and held his palms out again. He had learned long ago that machines could be predictable, but people, human or otherwise, required patience. The girl studied him, her expression taut with fear, then shifted, sliding the device from her throat and placing it carefully on the sand between them. A gesture of both trust and warning. He crouched. The translator sputtered, its casing cracked open to reveal filigrees of circuitry humming faintly with pale light. It wasn't like any hardware he had seen. He traced a finger along the fractured lines, careful not to disturb the runes etched faintly in the metal. They were older than the device itself, he thought, an inheritance, not an invention. He glanced at her again. She watched him as if expecting betrayal at any moment, her breath shallow but steady. He pulled a stabilizer from his pack and attached it to the cracked housing. The translator buzzed, coughed static, then warbled into sound. For a moment, fragments of her voice came through, softened, imperfect but comprehensible. Name, Elira. Her lips shaped the same sound. Elias repeated it, careful with the rhythm. Elira. Something shifted in her posture. Elira pressed her hand to her chest, nodding, a spark of fragile relief breaking through her guarded expression. She pointed at him, her eyes questioning. He answered, tapping his own chest. Elias. The translator cracked, struggling, but managed to echo him with a mechanical flatness, Elias. It wasn't much, but it was enough to break the silence. Elias felt a cautious thread form between them, tenuous but real. For a moment, the night seemed less hostile. Then the translator sputtered again, overlaying Elira's words with another voice, deeper, resonant, carrying syllables Elias did not recognize. The strange phrases rolled out like thunder, and Elira recoiled as if struck. She shook her head furiously, clutching his wrist with surprising strength. No. No, speak. The translator barely held the words together, but their urgency was unmistakable. Elias frowned. That language, what is it? Her silver eyes darted toward the horizon, then back to him. She searched for words, her mouth moving around syllables the translator could not keep up with. At last, it spat out fragments, broken but chilling, old tongue. Destroyed. Forbidden. Dangerous. He felt the desert air thicken. The idea that a language could be dangerous was absurd, or it should have been. But he remembered the way the ground had seemed to resonate when the device had first spoken it, and the raw terror in her reaction. This was not superstition. There was something deeper. Elira reached for the translator again, fiddled with its controls, and then spoke deliberately, slow enough for it to catch. If here, they come. They? Elias asked, though part of him already knew. Whoever she had fled, whatever had driven her to crash here, was tied to this tongue he had accidentally awakened. Her shoulders sagged. She raised her hand, pointing at the sky, and mimed a shape like a ship descending. Hunters, the translator supplied. Elias clenched his jaw. His mind raced with protocol, report to command, secure the site, await further orders. But none of that mattered out here. He looked at Elira, an exile, a fugitive, maybe even a danger herself, and knew he couldn't leave her to whatever hunters she feared. She had trusted him enough to give her name. That meant something. He adjusted the stabilizer, trying to coax more stability from the translator. We need to get you safe. Back at my outpost. She tilted her head, not fully understanding, but when he pointed at the distant glow of his rover, she nodded faintly. Together, they moved from the wrecked pod. She staggered at first, her body weakened, and he offered his arm. She hesitated, then leaned into it, each step deliberate. Elias felt her trembling through the thin fabric of her tunic, her fragility wrapped around a core of stubborn resilience. The ride back was quiet, filled only with the rover's hum and the occasional hiss of static from the translator. Elias stole glances at her. In the dim cabin light, she seemed otherworldly, her features both delicate and unyielding. She clutched the device like a talisman, every flicker of static tightening her grip. Halfway to the outpost, the translator came alive again, spilling out not her soft tones but the deeper, alien resonance. The rover's console lights flickered in tandem, systems reacting as though they recognized the sound. Elias cursed under his breath, slapping the controls to steady the power flow. Elira's gasp drew his attention. She pointed at the console, then at the translator. "See? It call." "What do you mean, it calls?" Her hands gestured, a sweeping motion outward, then curling back, as though drawing attention from the void itself. The translator struggled, then delivered, "Beacon. They hear." Elias's stomach dropped. The signal wasn't just noise. It was broadcasting. He tightened his grip on the steering lever, pushing the rover faster. Then we'd better not be here when they arrive. By the time they reached the outpost, the stars above had sharpened into pinpricks of ice. Elias guided her inside, the airlock hissing closed behind them. The familiar whir of machinery greeted him, usually a comfort, but tonight it felt like thin armor against the unknown. He ushered Elira to a chair and began checking the comms system, hands moving with practiced precision. The long-range sensors lit up with unusual interference. He squinted at the data. Faint signals, faint but growing, shadows on the edge of detection. Something had heard the call. Behind him, Elira whispered, her voice soft but resolute, her eyes fixed on the display. The translator gave shape to her words. "They come. Not for me only. For what you wake." Elias turned, meeting her gaze. He didn't fully understand, but he didn't need to. The truth was in her eyes, in the trembling certainty that what had been unleashed could not easily be silenced. The room seemed smaller now, the walls closer, the air thinner. Elias realized that the crash, the repair, even her survival, none of it was coincidence. He had stumbled onto something vast, and Elira had dragged herself across the stars to keep it hidden. Or perhaps to find someone reckless enough to bring it back to life. He leaned against the console, exhaling slowly. "Then we'll face it together." Elira blinked, as though the concept were foreign, then nodded once. For the first time, her expression softened not with fear, but with something like trust. Outside, the desert stretched in silence. But far beyond the horizon, signals whispered through the void, converging. The beacon had been lit, and whatever hunted that forbidden tongue was already on its way. The night stretched heavy over the outpost, every shadow sharp, every sound amplified. Elias paced the narrow control room, his eyes darting between sensor readings and the silent figure seated by the wall. Elira had drawn her knees to her chest, arms wrapped around the translator as though shielding it from the world. The faint glow of its fractured circuits painted her skin with a ghostly shimmer. She looked small, almost fragile, but her gaze never wavered from the readouts that pulsed across his console. The signals had grown stronger, nearer. At first they were little more than whispers against the static, but now they surged in rhythm, coordinated, purposeful. Ships. He didn't need Elira's warning to know that something was descending toward the desert. He could feel it in the tightening of the air, in the subtle hum that rattled through the walls. "You said they are hunters," he murmured, not sure if the translator would manage to keep up. "What do they want?" Elira lifted her head slowly. The translator clicked, sputtered, then delivered her reply in halting fragments. "Silence, erase, no trace." Elias frowned. "Erase what?" Her silver eyes flickered to the translator. She tapped it once, sharply, and whispered something in her own tongue. The device responded in a deep, resonant echo, words Elias could not parse, but he felt them vibrate in his chest. The lights overhead dimmed briefly, and the airlock sensors chimed as though recognizing a command. Elias shivered. She switched back, speaking slowly. "Old tongue. Power. My people, fear it." He leaned against the console, trying to piece the fragments together. A language so dangerous it was hunted down, buried, erased. And now it was alive again, here, in his outpost. He thought of the sparks, the strange resonance when it first spoke, the way the systems responded as though the words were commands rather than sounds. Perhaps they were. The low thrum of approaching engines cut through his thoughts. Elias checked the scanners, 3 ships, small but fast, dropping into the atmosphere. His pulse quickened. "They're here." Elira rose to her feet, her movements sharp, decisive. She gestured toward the auxiliary bay, miming the outline of a ship. Elias shook his head. The shuttle's offline. It hasn't flown in years. She pointed again, eyes blazing, and Elias understood. It didn't matter. They had no choice. He led her to the bay, heart pounding as dust fell from the rafters, shaken loose by the vibration of incoming craft. The shuttle sat in its cradle, dull with disuse, its hull patched with years of neglect. Elias clambered aboard, fingers already flying across the console. Systems whined in protest, flickering to life one by one. Power was weak, thrusters unreliable, but it might hold together long enough. Behind him, Elira placed the translator against the main control node. The lights pulsed once, then steadied. Elias blinked at the readings. Systems he hadn't touched were suddenly online, stabilizers sinking, engines warming faster than they should. He glanced back at her, suspicion and awe mingling. "You're doing that, aren't you?" She gave no reply, only pressed her palm to the hull as though urging it to wake. The translator whispered in its strange, forbidden resonance, and the shuttle seemed to obey. The bay doors trembled as something struck them from outside. A sharp hiss of energy weapons burned across the metal. Elias swore, slammed the release, and the shuttle's engines roared to life. With a shuddering lurch, they blasted free into the desert night. Wind screamed against the hull as they skimmed low over the sands. Behind them, the outpost shrank into darkness. Ahead, the stars stretched wide, but their path was cut by 3 descending hunters, sleek vessels marked by an alien insignia that glowed like fire across their hulls. Elias gripped the controls, weaving through rocky outcrops, every muscle taut. The shuttle groaned with strain, alarms flashing, but somehow it held. Elira stood braced behind him, eyes closed, lips moving silently. The translator echoed faintly, low phrases that seemed to ripple through the ship's systems, reinforcing, guiding. A burst of plasma seared past their flank, rocking the shuttle. Elias cursed, pulling hard on the stick. He had flown before, but never like this, never with death so close at his heels. He glanced at her. "You said they want to erase it. Does that include you?" Her eyes opened, silver blazing, and the translator caught her words with startling clarity, "Yes." The weight of it sank into him. She wasn't just a fugitive, she was a secret carried in flesh and blood, and they would burn entire worlds to silence her. A sudden warning blared. One of the hunters had locked onto them, missiles priming. Elias's mind raced, calculating options, finding none. Then Elira stepped forward, her hand brushing the translator. She spoke, not to him, but to the ship itself. The words poured out, rich and layered, and the translator deepened them into something older, something vast. The shuttle shuddered, systems sparking. For an instant, Elias feared it would tear itself apart. But then the engines flared with impossible thrust, catapulting them forward. The missile streaked past harmlessly, detonating in the dunes below. Elias stared in shock. "You can control it? That language?" She cut him off, voice hard. "Not control. Unlock." The word settled like a stone in his chest. Unlock. If this tongue was a key, what exactly was it meant to open? The hunters regrouped, circling, but Elias had no illusions. They couldn't keep running. Fuel would bleed out, systems would collapse. They needed another option. And as if in answer, the translator pulsed again, casting faint runes across the console. A map bloomed on the screen, coordinates deep within the desert. Elias felt a chill trace his spine. Elira saw it too. She placed her hand on the display, her expression caught between dread and inevitability. "It calls us." Elias swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the hunters closing in. He had always been a man who fixed broken things, piecing machines back together because someone had to. Now he was strapped into a shuttle with a fugitive alien girl and a language that wasn't supposed to exist, staring at a map to a place no one should find. He tightened his grip on the controls. "Then we follow it." The shuttle banked sharply, engines howling as they veered toward the coordinates. Behind them, the hunters surged in pursuit. Ahead, the desert stretched unbroken, a canvas of shadow beneath the stars. Somewhere within its depths lay the answer to the forbidden tongue, the reason Elira had fled, the reason her people hunted her still. The translator glowed softly between them, pulsing in rhythm with the ship, as though eager to reveal what lay ahead. And for the first time since the beacon had found him, Elias felt the shape of a choice forming, not just to survive, but to discover. The dunes rose and fell below, the hunters closing, the coordinates pulling them forward like a tide. The night was alive with pursuit, but within the shuttle's cramped cabin, a strange calm settled. Elias met Elira's gaze, and in that silent exchange, a fragile bond deepened. Whatever lay at the end of this path, they would face it together. The desert swallowed them, the hunters in their wake, and the map burned brighter on the console, promising revelations that neither of them could yet imagine. The desert gave way to stone. Elias guided the shuttle down into a canyon where sheer cliffs rose on either side, their surfaces etched with lines that looked less like natural erosion and more like design, angular, deliberate, ancient. The map on the console pulsed brighter, drawing them deeper until the canyon opened into a vast hollow beneath the ground. Structures jutted from the rock like the bones of a buried city, their surfaces humming faintly as though they had been waiting for this moment. The shuttle touched down on a platform of black stone. The engines wound down reluctantly, as if resisting silence. Elias unstrapped, his muscles stiff from strain, and turned to Elira. She stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the towering monolith ahead, its surface carved with the same runes that had glowed within her translator. Her lips moved soundlessly, reverence and fear mingling in her expression. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This is what the map was pointing to, isn't it?" She nodded once, slowly. The translator buzzed against her throat, its fractured circuits catching the rhythm of her words. "Nexus. Heart of old tongue. My people, destroyed entrances. Buried truth. But not all." Elias followed her gaze to the monolith. The runes shifted faintly as though alive, responding to her presence. He felt the weight of history pressing down, the enormity of standing at the threshold of something lost for ages. His instinct told him to catalogue, to analyze, to repair, but this was no machine to be tinkered with. This was older, hungrier. They advanced together. The monolith opened at their approach, its surface splitting soundlessly, revealing a corridor lined with pale light. Elira hesitated at the threshold, then stepped forward. Elias followed, every nerve alight. The passage led into a vast chamber at the center of the ruin. Columns rose like trees, their surfaces glowing faintly with inscriptions. At the heart of the chamber, a dais waited, etched with a spiral of symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the translator. Elias felt the pull of it, a gravity that wasn't physical but undeniable. "This place," he whispered. "It's alive." Elira's hand brushed one of the columns, and the translator deepened her words into something ancient. Language is not just words. It is command. Creation. Destruction. Architects spoke, and worlds obeyed. Elias felt a chill crawl down his spine. The forbidden tongue wasn't metaphor. It was literal power, embedded into the fabric of technology itself. The knowledge to build or unmake entire civilizations was bound into syllables. No wonder her people had tried to bury it. Before he could speak, the chamber shook. Dust fell from the high arches, and a deep rumble echoed through the canyon. Elias spun toward the entrance just as lights flared outside. The hunters had found them. Elira's expression hardened. "They come to silence us." Elias's mind raced. They had no weapons, no defenses, nothing but an old shuttle and a language he barely understood. Yet as the runes brightened, as the chamber itself seemed to lean toward Elira, he understood the truth. This was the weapon. Figures poured into the chamber, armored soldiers with sleek rifles glowing hot. Their leader barked a command in Elira's tongue, sharp and condemning. The translator managed only fragments: traitor, end. Elias instinctively stepped in front of her, though he knew the gesture was futile. The soldiers raised their rifles. Elira touched his arm gently, her silver eyes calm despite the danger. "Trust," she said, the word fragile but clear. Then she stepped forward, lifting her chin, and began to speak. The translator resonated with her voice, magnifying it into the chamber. The forbidden words spilled out, syllables layered and immense, each one vibrating through the stone, the air, even Elias's bones. The columns lit in sequence, the dais blazed, and the runes ignited in a torrent of light. The soldiers faltered. Their weapons wavered, their eyes wide with fear. The leader shouted another command, but it was drowned in the tide of sound. Elira's voice rose higher, her body trembling with the force of it, as if the language itself demanded a piece of her in exchange. Elias felt the chamber respond. Energy surged through the floor, coiling up the columns, blasting outward in a wave that shattered rifles and hurled soldiers backward. The hunters fell, their armor sparking, their eyes filled with terror. The leader staggered to his knees, shouting defiance even as the ruin itself pushed him down. Elira's voice faltered. Her knees buckled, but Elias caught her before she collapsed. The translator's glow dimmed, its circuits straining, smoke curling from its edges. She looked at him, lips pale, breath shallow. Too strong. Not meant, alone. He gripped her shoulders, searching her eyes. Then don't carry it alone. She blinked, startled, but the translator hummed between them, catching his words, threading them into the resonance of the chamber. Elias didn't know the forbidden tongue, but intent mattered, and the translator bridged the gulf. He spoke, not perfectly, not fully, but enough. Together their voices wove, her syllables flowing into his clumsy echoes, the translator binding them into something whole. The chamber responded with a final surge. The runes burned so bright the air itself seemed aflame, and the soldiers fled in panic, dragging their broken leader away. The ruin shuddered under the weight of its awakening, stone groaning, light cascading. Elira collapsed against him, exhausted but alive. The translator flickered weakly, the runes dimming now as though the ruin had spent its strength. Dust rained from above, cracks splitting across the walls. Elias pulled her to her feet. We have to go. Together they stumbled back through the corridor, the chamber collapsing behind them. The canyon roared as stone split and firelight poured through ancient fissures. Elias half-carried Elira into the shuttle, slamming the hatch just as the platform buckled. The engine screamed back to life, still humming with remnants of the forbidden tongue. The shuttle lurched upward, away from the collapsing ruin, fire and stone swallowing the nexus below. When they finally broke into the open night, the hunters were gone. The sky stretched vast and silent, stars glinting cold above the desert. Elias guided the shuttle higher, his breath ragged, his body trembling with exhaustion. Elira stirred weakly beside him. Buried again, she whispered. But not gone. He glanced at her. And you? Her eyes met his, steady despite her fatigue. Still here. Because of you. The words struck him with quiet force. He had been an engineer, a man who fixed machines, nothing more. Yet tonight he had touched something greater, and though he didn't understand it fully, he knew one truth. He had chosen not to abandon her, and in that choice, they had faced down an entire civilization's fear. The shuttle climbed higher, the desert shrinking below. Elias looked out at the stars, their endless scatter of possibility, and felt the weight of what they now carried. The forbidden tongue had not died, it lived in Elira, in the fractured translator, in the bond they had forged. He exhaled, steadying his hands on the controls. Whatever came next, hunters, civilizations, mysteries buried even deeper, they would face it together. But for the first time, Elias felt not alone, but part of something greater. And though the ruins lay buried, their resonance lingered, a promise that the story was only beginning.